So my name is Elizabeth, and I've been a long-time reader and a long-time sort of BookTube creep. So I decided that since I'm currently getting married in 3 weeks and like setting up a new apartment and also like between jobs, why not just like throw caution to the wind and scrap my to-do list and record a YouTube video about the books I've read this month. I'm so responsible. Anyway, I thought I would start this off by talking about the books that I've read this month, and I do have my handy-dandy Goodreads app. So the first book I read this month was actually A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. So sorry for mispronouncing these names. Anyway, I started this. It was an Audible book that I picked up because I've been driving a lot for the last 2 months and I need books to keep me occupied. So I got A Gentleman in Moscow because I've been wanting to read it for about a good year now. And I got it primarily because I love history. Like, if you follow any of my books or see the things that I'm reading, I love history. I graduated with an undergrad in history. I'm playing around with the idea of going back to school in history. Yeah, so I love history. And the one area that I really want to become more comfortable in as far as history goes is Russian history, specifically all of it. And so I thought, okay, this book is about a Russian aristocrat. Oh my God, it's not a Disney character, and he is sent to live in house arrest in this hotel in Moscow, I believe, and he has zany, weird adventures that sort of have something to do with what's going on outside, but honestly, I didn't even finish this book. I got like 3/4 of the way through it, and it was just like, oh, this is basically Eloise in Russia, which all that to say means that this story literally could have taken place almost anywhere, with like a few random exceptions of just like, yeah, some of this stuff is happening because of the Bolsheviks and like the politics that are going on, and some people are just like ridiculous communists, and like the guy had some interesting things to say about like art in a communist era and how it kind of became highly politicized, and so they didn't really want to explore art. They wanted to make a point, which I thought that was really interesting. I was like, okay, so art for the sake of a zeitgeist, like that's a problem. Because it doesn't really produce good art. It produces really good propaganda, but not necessarily good art. But anyway, that being said, those little times were so far in between, like, I just wasn't interested. Like, you may write really nicely, and it was all kind of pretty, and the words were nice, and a few of the adventures were kind of quaint, but it was really not what I was looking for, so I just sort of, like, called it good, and yeah, that's how I felt about A Gentleman in Moscow. So honestly, if you're reading for if you're looking for a really good, what do you call it, like a good, like, pleasant read, like one of those things where it's just sort of like, oh, this is comforting and kind of nice, and, you know, it doesn't really, like, glue you to the edge of your seat at all, I would recommend it. Honestly, this is a very good book to fall asleep to. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean in a, like, it's a comforting, nice book. Okay, so then the second book I read this month, I'm fucking proud of, and here's why. The second book I read this month is The Making of the Atomic Bomb by Richard Rhodes, and let me explain to you, this has taken me a year to read. And I finished it. You know how I finished it? I got the audiobook. The audiobook's about 40 hours long, and it is full of just so much good history. It's so much good history, though. Yeah, the audiobook's about 4 hours. Well, not 4 hours. The audiobook's about 38 hours long. And I got it last summer because I finished Eric Larson's In the Garden of Beasts, and I was just like on a World War II kick, and I had heard about this book by listening to a podcast actually about the show Manhattan, which I haven't watched yet, but the guy who wrote the show was like, hey, if you want to know about more about the making of the atomic bomb, literally go buy the book about the making of the atomic bomb by Richard Rhodes. And so I was like, okay, cool. So I looked it up, and I found this in a secondhand bookshop, and the guy was super helpful in like helping me find it. It's in Oklahoma City, and I want to say in Edmond, and I want to say it's called Oxford Books. But hey guys, if you're from the Oklahoma City, Edmond area, it's literally on 2nd Street, like next to the sort of McDonald's version of a sushi shop, like the Nihad Sushi or whatever, which is pretty good if you want some cheap sushi, but like, you really probably don't want cheap sushi. I don't know. I'm a troglodyte. I don't really know the difference between good sushi and bad sushi. I just like it because I'm a troglodyte. Anyway, the guy was really helpful in finding it, and so I found it, and I started reading it, and I really enjoyed it, but then I didn't have enough time to read it, so instead I bought the audiobook and started listening to it because I go on long road trips frequently. And so especially in this last month when I traveled from Oklahoma City to Kansas City, and then I traveled to Nashville at one point, and then I took 2 trips out to West Virginia because that's where I'm living now. And at one point I took a trip to North Carolina. I got this book, and I just was like, I'm gonna finish this book, dang it. And so I did, and it was fabulous. So here's the whole thing about this book. The first part of it's just kind of like the little scientists, like they're kind of like the greatest minds of our time. You know, Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, all of these people who are just like kind of a big deal, like Oppenheimer and all that stuff. The first part of it is basically them just discovering different things about physics and just how this could all work together. And they're just like all like super pumped and like really excited about learning and discovering, and I'm excited about learning and discovering, and it's just like we're all like on this road together, yeah. And then the war happens, and so then you start getting some more details about what's going on in World War II, what's going on before World War II, how a lot of these Jewish scientists were affected and how they had to leave the country and stuff like that, or leave whatever area they were in, how a lot of them found a haven in American universities, because American universities got that moolah, and how some of them found haven in British universities as well, and just kind of like how they all kind of came together to get their people out of there, and some of the Italian scientists and stuff that needed to travel and everything. So that's basically like the second part of the book. The third part, like, and you're still like kind of like, yeah, like we're discovering things, this is fun. But then the third part of the book is when it starts getting a little bit more serious, and the war is really ratcheting up, and we're starting to really get into this idea of like, okay, we should do something with atomic energy. Like, how are we going to make this happen? And so that's when they start kind of like morphing from like, we're excited, to like, the war is on, we want this to end now, and we're going to make this bomb. And it's just, and the guy does such a good job of like writing just an incredibly comprehensive history of everything that's going on within that process, but then also everything that's going on within World War II, like the just honestly the big attacks that are happening, and also talking about what had been happening in Japan at the time, in the Eastern Theater. Ooh, I should know that, shouldn't I? And just everything that's going on in that area of the world, and all the wars and all the things that are happening there. And so he does a really, really very comprehensive job of really describing these things and kind of like bringing you into the mentality and into the dread of what's happening. So then, of course, the last part of it is the actual construction of the atomic bomb, and then the test, and then the two detonations in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I gotta tell you, so again, I listened to it, but like that last hour and a half after they bomb Hiroshima is just nothing but really detailed eyewitness accounts of what happened after the bomb was dropped, and it was sobering as hell. Because up to that point, again, in the beginning part, you're just sort of like, science! And then the second part, you're like, okay, war, it's a big deal. This is kind of getting there. And then that last part is just sort of like, okay, but here's the fallout. Like, here's how the world literally changed because this weapon was invented. And you just really get that feeling that what they created was not a bomb, but what they did was take a force of nature and try to weaponize it. But they don't really have that much control over it, at least at this point, if ever. So anyway, I'm really proud of finishing this, and I really enjoyed it. And if you are looking for an incredibly comprehensive history of the making of the atomic bomb, or honestly just World War II in general, I would really look this up. I highly recommend it to anybody and everybody. Okay, so then the other book that I read was Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson. And I have been trying to explore more astrophysics and things like that just because I was never... Science was always kind of hard for me in class because I never quite understood the concepts enough to, like, get A's. So I never took science classes because, like, lol, I don't want that going on my transcript and, like, tanking my GPA. So I stayed away from that stuff. Well, now I'm older and I don't have to do that. And so instead, I'm reading books about it, or rather, I'm listening to them. And yeah, it was really good. Obviously, he did a really good job of succinctly describing, like, very quickly, obviously, astrophysics for people in a hurry, like myself. Just some of the different concepts that go behind this stuff. And honestly, I'm really curious to read more. So good job, Neil deGrasse Tyson. Yeah, so those, I know it's only 3 books that I read this month, but that one was a big one. And so I've gotten, and I mean, yeah, I've been busy. So that is what I read in the month of August. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. And if you have any comments, or you disagree with me about some things, or you want to, like, geek out with me about some things, like, write in the comments below, let me know. All right, I hope you have a good day. Bye.